The year was 1917. The world was engulfed in the flames of the Great War, a conflict that had already claimed millions of lives and left countless others scarred, both physically and emotionally. The Western Front, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border, was the epicenter of this brutal confrontation. The Western Front, a brutal scar across the face of Europe, was locked in a stalemate. Trenches snaked across the landscape, a labyrinth of misery and death. Soldiers on both sides were entrenched in a seemingly endless cycle of attack and counterattack, with little ground gained or lost. Millions of men faced each other across a desolate landscape of mud, barbed wire, and death. The land between the trenches, known as no man's land, was a hellish expanse of craters, shattered trees, and the remnants of failed offensives. It was a place where hope went to die, and where the living envied the dead. The Germans, having made strategic withdrawals to the formidable Hindenburg Line, were preparing for a massive counteroffensive. This line of defense, named after the German commander Paul von Hindenburg, was a series of fortifications that the Germans believed to be impregnable. They had pulled back to these positions to shorten their lines and strengthen their defenses. The air was thick with tension. Every soldier knew that at any moment, the order could come to go over the top, to charge into the maelstrom of bullets and shells. Anxiety gnawed at their insides, and the constant threat of death was a heavy burden to bear. The constant rumble of artillery fire provided a grim soundtrack to life and death in the trenches. Day and night the guns roared, sending shells hurtling through the air to explode with devastating force. The ground shook, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the cries of the wounded. British soldiers, weary and mud-caked, huddled in their dugouts, haunted by the memories of past battles and the uncertainty of the future. They had seen friends fall, had endured gas attacks, and had lived through the horrors of trench warfare. Their faces, etched with fatigue and fear, told the story of a generation caught in the grip of a war that seemed to have no end. In moments of respite, they wrote letters home, trying to maintain a connection to a world that seemed increasingly distant. They shared what little food they had, finding solace in camaraderie and the small comforts of shared humanity. Yet even in these brief moments of peace, the specter of war loomed large, a constant reminder of the fragility of life on the front lines. Medics worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, their makeshift hospitals overwhelmed by the sheer number of casualties. The bravery of these men and women, who risked their lives to save others, was a beacon of hope in the darkness of war. But for many, the wounds were too severe, and the journey from the battlefield to the hospital was their final one. As the sun set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the scarred earth, soldiers stood guard, ever vigilant. The night brought no respite, only a different kind of terror. The war had become a test of endurance, a battle not just for territory, but for the very soul of humanity. Lance Corporals William Schofield and Tom Blake, two young men barely out of their teens, were summoned to headquarters. They had been through the trenches, seen the horrors of war, but nothing could prepare them for the gravity of the mission they were about to undertake. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the faces of the officers gathered within the cramped bunker. The air was thick with tension, the weight of countless lives pressing down on their shoulders. Each officer knew the stakes, and the gravity of the situation was palpable. A map crisscrossed with lines and annotations lay on the table, a stark representation of the battlefield that separated them from the enemy. The lines told a story of strategy and sacrifice, of men who had fought and fallen, and of the perilous path that lay ahead. The mission was as simple as it was perilous: deliver a message to the 2nd Battalion, scheduled to advance at dawn. The message was a lifeline, a desperate attempt to prevent a massacre. The 2nd Battalion was walking into a trap, and only Schofield and Blake could stop it. The Germans, they had just learned, had withdrawn, not retreated. It was a strategic move, a deadly ruse designed to lure the British forces into a fatal advance. The intelligence was clear, but the window to act was closing rapidly. An attack would be suicide. The enemy was waiting, ready to unleash a devastating counterattack. The terrain was treacherous, filled with hidden dangers and the remnants of previous battles. Every step forward was fraught with peril. The lives of 1,600 men, including Blake's own brother, hung in the balance. The weight of this knowledge was almost unbearable, but it also fueled their determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew the cost of failure. The fate of so many rested on their shoulders, and they were resolved to see the mission through, no matter the cost. As they prepared for the mission, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. They checked their equipment, ensuring everything was in order. Every piece of gear, every weapon, could mean the difference between life and death. The camaraderie among the soldiers was evident, a bond forged in the crucible of war. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic farewells, just quiet moments of reflection and the unspoken understanding that this could be the last time they saw their comrades. The weight of their mission was heavy, but so was their resolve. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead for the sake of their brothers in arms. With a final nod, Schofield and Blake set out, their hearts heavy but their spirits unbroken. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, but they were driven by a sense of duty and a fierce determination to save their fellow soldiers. The fate of the 2nd Battalion rested in their hands, and they would not falter. As the first light of dawn began to break, the battlefield was eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. Schofield and Blake moved with purpose, their mission clear in their minds. They knew the path would be treacherous, but they also knew that failure was not an option. The lives of 1,600 men depended on them, and they were determined to succeed. The eerie silence of no man's land was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of artillery. Schofield and Blake crawled through the mud, the stench of death clinging to the air. Every inch of the ground was scarred by war, littered with the debris of past battles. Fear was a constant companion, gnawing at their insides. They relied on their training, their friendship, and a shared sense of duty. They had to reach their destination. Failure was not an option. An ear-splitting explosion ripped through the air. The ground shuddered beneath them. Dust and smoke filled the air, obscuring their vision. They had stumbled across a tripwire. When the dust settled, Schofield saw Blake lying a few feet away, his eyes staring vacantly at the sky. Schofield crawled towards him, his heart pounding in his chest. He gently shook his friend, but Blake didn't respond. His eyes were fixed and lifeless. A single crimson stain bloomed on his chest, a stark reminder of the fragility of life in this unforgiving landscape. Grief threatened to overwhelm Schofield, but he knew he couldn't afford to break down. He was now the sole carrier of a message that could save hundreds of lives. He had promised Blake he would deliver it. He would honor that promise no matter the cost. He picked up the message, tucked it safely away, and continued his journey, alone. He was a small, insignificant figure against the vast backdrop of war, but he carried the weight of 1,600 lives on his shoulders. Section 6, German territory. Schofield stumbled upon a deserted German trench. He was deep in enemy territory now, surrounded by the ghosts of war. The trench was littered with discarded equipment, empty ration tins, and the remnants of letters from home. He found a helmet and a canteen, small comforts that might improve his chances of survival. He pressed on, driven by the memory of his friend and the urgency of his mission. Section 7, reaching the front line. He could hear the sound of gunfire now, closer than before. He could see the flashes of artillery fire illuminating the night sky. He had reached the front line of the 2nd Battalion. He had to warn them, prevent a catastrophe. He scrambled over the top of the trench, his heart pounding in his chest. He was exposed, vulnerable, but he didn't hesitate. Section 8, delivering the message. He found the colonel in a dugout, surrounded by young, eager soldiers, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight. He saluted, his hand trembling slightly. He relayed his message, the words tumbling out in a rush. Relief washed over the colonel's face. He immediately gave the order to stand down. The attack was called off. Schofield had reached them in time. He had saved 1,600 men, including Blake's brother. Section 9. Reflections on a grueling mission. The dawn broke over the war-torn landscape, casting a soft golden light on the weary soldiers who had found a moment's respite in the trenches. The air was thick with the scent of earth and gunpowder, a stark reminder of the battles fought and the lives lost. He found Blake's brother, a young man who bore a striking resemblance to his fallen friend. The resemblance was uncanny, almost as if Blake himself had returned. The young soldier's eyes, filled with a mix of hope and sorrow, mirrored the same determination and bravery that Blake had shown. He told him about Blake, about his courage and about his sacrifice. The words came slowly, each one heavy with emotion. He recounted the harrowing journey, the dangers they had faced, and the moments of camaraderie that had kept them going. The young soldier listened intently, his eyes never leaving the storyteller's face. He handed him a small, engraved cigarette case, the only personal possession Blake had carried. The case was a simple yet profound token of the bond they had shared. It was a symbol of the promise he had made and the mission he had undertaken. The young soldier accepted it with trembling hands, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. As Schofield walked away from the front lines, the rising sun cast long shadows across the battlefield. Each step felt like a release, a shedding of the weight that had burdened him for so long. The battlefield, once a place of chaos and destruction, now seemed almost serene in the early morning light. He had seen horrors he would never forget, but he had also witnessed extraordinary courage and selflessness. The memories of the fallen, the bravery of his comrades, and the sacrifices made would forever be etched in his mind. These experiences had changed him, shaping him into a man who understood the true cost of war. He had completed his mission. The sense of accomplishment was bittersweet, tinged with the sorrow of loss and the relief of survival. He stood alone for a moment, taking in the vast expanse of the battlefield, a silent witness to the countless stories of bravery and sacrifice that had unfolded there. He had honored his promise. He was going home. The journey back was filled with mixed emotions. There was joy in the thought of returning to loved ones, but also a deep sense of melancholy for those who would never make the journey home. As he walked towards the horizon, he carried with him the memories of his fallen comrades, a testament to their bravery and the enduring spirit of those who had fought alongside him.